All right, good afternoon, everybody out there in the land of Facebook and YouTube. If you're new to our online series, this is a interview and performance series that we do every single week for the Kareem Candy World Orchestra. And today we have the wonderful pleasure of having the great drummer and composer and educator, Maria Joyner Wulf, with us today. Maria, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's a pleasure to have you here. So what I would like to do is, as with most of our guests, kind of talk about how you got started in music and your influences and all that kind of stuff. So where did you grow up and how did you begin a life in music?
Sure. Well, I'm from the Northwest. I grew up in Aberdeen. And, I wasn't in a musical family. I'm really the only musician that came out of it. I have one cousin who's a musician and music teacher. Angie, she's up in the Lake Washington School District. But other than that, I'm really the only musician in my family. But I always had this love of music. I was always drawn to it. When I was growing up, Aberdeen really had a rich and active music community. It had a history of excellence at the high school and at the college. There were some great band directors. Hampton Wines was a longtime director who really built the program up, at a nationally acclaimed level. He was my next door neighbor. And so he had a son, I think, who played trumpet, who was always playing. And then my backyard neighbor was Craig Wellington, who directed the Elks Band, the Elks Lodge, and he was director of one of the Army bands, I think, I'm not certain. And he was also head of the music department at the college. His son was my best friend, who was very active in music. So in my community, I was surrounded by music. And I was just always drawn to it. Don't know why, I think it was in me. And as for the drums, I was just always drawn towards that. When you're a kid and you look at musicians on a stage, oftentimes you'll be drawn to one instrument. Like maybe for you it was saxophone, and it was like, that's really cool. I was just always drawn to the drums. It was just a thing. And I went to a private school, went to St. Mary's, and they didn't have a music program. So I wasn't able to really start any kind of a band program till high school. So I was kind of a late starter in that sense. My dad got me a snare drum in 4th grade because I was begging for a drum set, I think, since I was like in 1st grade. And like most kids do, everyone wants a drum set. And my parents were like, I don't know. But I think they saw that I was just constantly wanting to play and wanting to go to the music stores and look at the instruments. And so got me a snare drum. And of course, I wasn't taking lessons and just kind of banged on it for a while. And I think they hooked me up with lessons with like a retired choir teacher. She played piano and I learned a little bit. But I didn't really start digging in until high school.
Before I forget, and I'm going to dig in right there, I forgot to mention this. If you have any questions for Maria during the course of this interview or myself or anything about what we're talking about, please feel free to put it in the comments and we'll do our best to get to them. Sorry to detract from the interview here, but sure. I always forget to mention that. Mm-hmm. So your first private instructor was a choir teacher and you were learning piano, is that correct?
No, it was really funny because she actually had a book, and I don't know if I still have it. It was a book that was for piano and snare drum and maybe a C instrument like flute. It's like of all the arrangements of, an ensemble. And so she would play the piano part and I'd play the snare drum part. Really, really basic rhythms.
Yeah. Like kind of like a beginning band book sort of thing, rudimentary.
A lot of eighth notes and quarter notes and a few rolls. So that got me started. And then started band in high school and just really, really loved it. And we had an active jazz band that went to a lot of festivals. And so I got addicted to that kind of adrenaline rush of being at a festival, and we started to win awards, so that was exciting. But really what roped me in was going to the Bud Shank Jazz Workshop, and that was huge. And I know that is such an important element of the Northwest jazz scene. There's so many of us who went there, in high school. And that really roped me in because I think that was my junior year, summer after my junior year. And I was kind of getting bored with drums, and it lost its appeal because I really thought it was one-dimensional, and you can't really be expressive on this, and everyone thinks all you do is pound. And I met Jeff Hamilton, he was the teacher, and mind blown about the musicality of drums. And I thought, okay, I'm sold, I could do this. And by that point I thought, okay, I think I really want to pursue this. And So then went to Mount Hood Community College. I got a scholarship there. And you know how things kind of connected is when I was at the Port Townsend workshop, I met a drummer named Chris Conrad, who's a Portland drummer, and he would just hang out up there. He wouldn't attend, but like Jeff was there and all the cats, and so he'd just go up there and sit in the back of the room and hang. And I think we got to talking, and he ended up giving me a lesson. And I told him, well, I'm going to Mount Hood. He said, you know, here's my card. Look me up. I'll give you lessons. And that was a really, really, I think, important step in my development because Chris was at Berkeley, and he studied with Alan Dawson. And so hanging with Chris for 2 or 3 years, he taught me all of Alan Dawson's stuff. And what an awesome, wonderful foundation that laid for me. And he was just, you know, he's an example of just the best kind of mentor. You know, our lessons, we're supposed to have an hour lesson. I pay him for an hour. They were 2 or 3 hours. Just a lot of talk. He'd just talk, and a lot of playing. He'd send me home with a pile of records every week. It's like, okay, listen to these, copy these onto tape. And I would. I was diligent, and so got a lot of recordings that way. Whenever he had a gig, he'd be like, come on down to this Italian restaurant. I'm playing with Pete Chrislieb. Come on in and sit in. And of course, I was so green and scared to death. But he was so gracious. He let me sit in. Pete was like, yeah, come on in, and you know, and all that. So that was just a great growing experience. Mount Hood, really great step for me right out of high school. I probably wasn't ready for a 4-year school. You know, I probably would have cowered and come home with my tail between my legs. But it was a great stepping stone because it was a smaller school, really great players, and of course Dave Bardoon is there. So I got to experience the Bardoon experience, playing in Genesis, the jazz choir, for a year. And it's a taste of real life. A lot of music, cranking out a lot of music, and he would take us out on the road. We'd do tours, you know, a few days or a week, and I remember we'd do like 3 shows a day, 3 days. I remember we did 10 shows in 3 or 4 days, and it was just, man, but it was great. Really great experience, and hanging in Portland, just a great opportunity at a pivotal time in my life. And at that time, so Tony Pacini was at Mount Hood, great piano player. We started doing trio stuff. John Sanders, piano player, is up in Seattle now. I played with him, and just tons of fun. But Portland was great because the young cats could come in and get mentored by the experienced people. You know, I remember like playing with Tony and like doing a gig with Andre St. James, the bass player, and I remember being on a break with him, sitting at the bar, and he's like, well, show me your set list, show me all the stuff you play. And it was this piece of paper, just on, you know, notebook paper, and what he did is he took all these songs and he wrote, here's a definitive album. Yeah. Oh, listen to Miles' version of this. Oh, listen to the way Art Taylor plays drums on this one. Yeah. Oh, this is a Philly. Listen to the way play like Philly. And he sat there like 3 pages of charts. What a great experience. And Ron Steen, drummer down there, would host jam sessions.
He still does.
Yeah, I saw that. And I'd go, and I was just scared to death, but, you know, I was just so excited to play. And you get to go have that experience of playing. Leroy Vinegar would show up with Dick Burke, and they'd sit in and just blow the roof off the place.
I think, you know, many of these people are watching. I mean, some are musicians and some are not.
Mm-hmm.
The musicians, for the most part, I think would know quite a bit about what you're talking about. The non-musicians, you've had access to a lot of wonderful, like world-class musical minds that not a lot of people get those experiences. That's very, very wonderful. I mean, that's great. So, and also the time period too. I'm curious about when you were at the Bud Shank Jazz Festival. That's kind of a bone of contention because it was the Bud Shank Jazz Festival, and then it switched to the Centrum. That's a whole. We're not going to touch that. It gets kind of political. But so who else was around when you went to the? I know Jeff Hamilton. That's enough right there. But who else was around when you were there?
Well, so faculty-wise, here's another just wonderful experience for, you know, just this green kid coming out of high school. You know, George Cables was my first combo coach. And I think about just how scared I was and how timid, and I just go tink and tink and tink. And he was just so gracious, you know, and patient with me. And let's see, there's a drummer the second year. I remember Jeff was having surgery, so he couldn't coach, and he sent a drummer named Lawrence Marable, who some people may have heard of, not a lot of people, but he was a West Coast drummer. You can find him on some Chet Baker recordings, and he was my combo coach the second year, and I kind of smirk because the whole week we're doing these combo rehearsals. He was just focusing. I was getting a drum lesson from him the whole time. And the other players, they were laughing about it. They thought, well, this is fun. We're getting a drum lesson too. But it was so wonderful to work with him. One year, Jiggs Wiggum, trombone player, was my combo coach. But boy, there were so many Seattle players there at that time. The Marriott brothers. I remember Stuart McDonald was there. Don Clement was there. Steve Korn was there. Yeah. I laugh about this because Steve Korn and I remember were hanging out one summer there, and we begged Jeff Hamilton to give us bonus lessons, like on the side. Yeah. We stayed after once and said, could you, if we paid you or something, could you give us lessons? He was like, He said, tell you what, if you haul my gear for the week. And we're like, okay. And we're like, we're hauling his drum. This is Jeff Hamilton's drum. And I laughed because I forgot about that. And when I moved back up to the area, early 2000, and, Steve was really busy, everywhere. And I remember talking to him on the phone once, and I introduced myself. Yeah. Well, Steve, I just wanted to meet you. My name's Maria. I'm a drummer. And he's like, Maria, we hung out together, in Port Townsend. Do you not remember? I was like, oh, gosh, yeah, sorry. Hey, how are you? So great opportunity, to meet the faculty, who, again, were so gracious with their time. And then, that's why I know so many people up around Seattle, because we all knew each other from high school. From that, and then we'd see each other at the festivals. And then we were in competition with each other at the festivals, throughout the year. So it was great fun.
Well, I want to go back a little bit earlier, too. So in Aberdeen, everyone knows about Kurt Cobain and all that kind of stuff, But besides, let's talk about the jazz side of it. When you were in high school in this program that had been built up by your instructor there, were there any other musicians of note that came out of that program that are still playing or around the scene that you grew up with and maybe played with during that time?
Musician-wise, Casey Evans.
Okay.
We just played a gig with Casey last month, and that's the first time Casey and I have ever played together. What was it?
The Golden Airs, I think you mentioned, or
that's a jazz choir.
Okay.
And I'm trying to think our space. I was either 2 years older or 3 years older, because I think I remember being in there when he was playing piano. I can't quite remember. But I do remember he was leading the musical a couple times when I was in the pit. But yeah, of course, I graduated and never saw him again, but then I saw his name popping up, and I was like, oh, Casey. So yeah, he's wonderful. He's such a phenomenal musician. If you ever get a chance to see Casey Evans, he does a lot of solo piano work.
Yeah, we'll get him on.
Yeah,
we're here to talk about you.
Sorry.
We'll talk about Case later.
Shout out to my buds. So him, and then there's a really great piano player named Jay Simons. Who's one of these people who everything he touches turns to gold. He's now, I don't know if he's the president of, if you know the company Atlassian. He was making bank. No, but he's someone, I think he went into political science. He worked for a law firm, did a lot of solo piano playing around the world. He's like head of the software company, lives in San Francisco. He's an excellent piano player. He was doing that professionally for a while. But I'm trying to think, other than that, I could be missing someone really big. There's a lot of players who are still playing just for fun, and they're down in town there.
This is not like downgrading, or I'm just curious, who's still playing, who's around doing stuff. That was, and what about, I know Portland and Mount Hood, just a cavalcade of great players, but who was in the sphere of influence when you were down there at Mount Hood?
Well, like I said, of course, for faculty, Dave Bardoon was there, and that's just an experience. They call it the Bardoon experience. It's just a taste of real life, of gigging life, and the rigor.
For people that don't know, he's a tremendous musician and arranger, and he produces a lot of charts that many people, if you've been in jazz choir or big band, you've played one of his charts at some point or another.
Anyone who's gone through school, band, or choir, they know the Bardoon stuff. If you've ever been to a school jazz festival, you'll see it. So he was on faculty there, and they had great faculty. They had teachers who would teach. They went to Eastman, and they would teach the same stuff that they learned there. Like I said, Tony Pacini, a piano player. Look him up, Tony Pacini. I know this is about me, but in fact, he and I were talking. We're going to start playing again. We've got some projects we're talking about for next year. Excellent piano player. Like I said, John Sanders was there. That school has a history of cranking out great players who went on to play with the Kenton Band. Gary Hobbs is a drummer who went through there. Jeff Usitalo, trombone player. They're, I think, both on the Journey to Capricorn album. Boy, off the top of my head, I'm trying to think. There's other people who just continue to play and sing for fun.
I know, I know Aberdeen's history a little bit. I know there's not a whole lot of jazz clubs there.
No.
I know. Well, let me ask you this: when you were growing up in high school, were there any clubs that you could go and play and hear people play in Aberdeen?
No, in fact, my first gig, like actual gig we got paid for, was like at a country club, and it was somebody's wedding. So I had a handful of opportunities like that, but no, there wasn't any place, say like downtown, where you can go sit in. The Elks Band had a jazz band, and they were starting to do, concerts and things with the school kids. But at that time, no, I'm not sure. Yeah. I have family that's still there, and I'll go down, but I don't really spend a lot of time there. So.
Okay, well then let's fast forward here to Portland. Now I already know it's going to be a totally different story here. So when you were hanging out in Portland and going to school down there, what were some venues? Because they've had a long history of great venues and artists, like you said, Leroy Vinegar. I'm sure Mel Brown was around and all that kind of stuff. So what was kind of the scene like when you were going to school at Mount Hood?
Yeah, boy, probably the names of the venues are going to slip my mind. But if I recall, I'm trying to think where Ron Steen had his jam. I don't know if that was Produce Row. I could be wrong, but Mel Brown hosted a jam at the Hobbit for a long time.
Mel Brown hosted a jam everywhere for a long time.
Everywhere. And I haven't lived there since probably 94, so I know there's some places. I'm trying to think. There's a place called the Owl. I know I played there. It's funny, the names are slipping my mind, but I remember like the lobby of the Red Lion Hotel. They'd have jazz there.
What about, there were several clubs, I'm sure, and I'm sure any Portland musician will say, 1994 was da-da-da-da. But what about some other musicians on the scene playing? You mentioned Ron and Tony Pacini, but and Mel Brown, which is a big one. Mm-hmm. Any other artists you can recall maybe that were working in the clubs down? Like, if you talk about Seattle, someone will say, like, Jay Thomas or Greta Matassa, but who were on the scene down in Portland at that time? Well,
like I said, there was monsters like Leroy Vinegar. And great mentors like Andre St. James. I remember, names are difficult for me over time. John Stoll. Yeah. I got to jam with John Stoll. I guess tying into this, I did 2 years at Mount Hood, and then I did 1 year at Portland State. Okay. And while I was at Portland State, Charlie Gray was in charge of the jazz program there. And I remember Gary Barone is a trumpet player. His brother is Mike Barone. He's a trombone player and did a lot of arranging for big bands in L.A. For years and years. Wrote for the Tonight Show Band and things like that. And his brother, Gary, who's equally talented, was a trumpet player. He was getting his doctorate. And Tim Gilson was a bass player, professional bass player who's working on his master's. So the top combo that I was in was with these, world-class players. So that year, I only did 1 year there, but it was just a great opportunity. Gary knew Cat, so he knew John Stoll. So on Saturdays, I got to jam, with them. Yeah. And John would be like, I just got back from New York, and Tom Harrell just scribbled out this chart, and it's like Tom Harrell's trumpet player, Tom Harrell's writing. So just so many great experiences.
Well, that's a cool thing because there are wonderful musicians, no doubt. I mean, there's lots of different great players, but a lot of times, you might just like play a standard melody or a stock melody and so on, play a melody. But if you're working with people that are actually arrangers and coming up with really cool parts and things to play, that makes it more interesting. And being around all these people, you're having those experiences too. That's quite an education.
Yeah, and I think two takeaways from that, two things I remember is like being a drummer, playing with a professional, experienced bass player, that sense of time. I mean, you can tell someone you need to play with better time, and you can play with a metronome, but you don't know what that feels like until you're playing with someone who has great time.
Yeah, well, you're an educator, I'm an educator, and we've talked about this with several guests. I mean, and I'm sure my students, if anyone watching, they've heard me say this. I mean, you can play everything correctly, but if it doesn't feel right, you're not getting the job done. And that is, it's a very difficult thing to teach someone. It's like, well, you just got to listen to recordings and you got to play with people and play with great players, and that helps. And wow, I mean, in case anyone is wondering about this, do you have any thoughts about how to convey that to students? I mean, any ideas about how to impart, all right, this is how to, this is a big question. I know,
Sure.
maybe we should just sidestep it.
Well,
but
there's conveying it, meaning telling them, this is the information you need. But honestly, they have got to do it. It's like, the saying, you can't teach jazz, it has to be learned. And again, I don't know, like playing with a metronome, yeah, you can practice that, but there's something different when you're playing with a player who's using good time. So my best advice is play with someone who is better than you. Play with someone who has better time, because it's a feel. It's a feel, and it's a sense. As for imparting that, other than telling them, they have to want to do it. They have to be excited to do it. So perhaps providing those opportunities. That's why jam sessions are so wonderful if you can get the pros to be there to be the house musician with the kids. A lot of times they'll have the house musicians play their set and then pew, which is fine. They need a break. And it is great to have a venue for all the young players to just get there and do their thing and try stuff out. But when you have that opportunity of sitting in with a pro, that's such a valuable experience. It's such a
couldn't
valuable
agree
experience.
more. Well, I want to move forward here
Sure.
because the hour goes quick, and there's a lot
Absolutely.
of stuff we got to
Sure.
do here. So you're out Mount Hood, and then you went to University of North Texas. How did that come about?
I did. So I didn't really know about North Texas. I think maybe the term North Texas State, the 1 o'clock band, was always something that you'd hear. And I remember in high school and saying something about, well, the 1 o'clock band, blah, blah, blah. I thought that was some professional group, kind of like the Tonight Show band. But in Portland, met so many players, like, oh, they went to North Texas. That person went to North Texas. And I'm thinking, well, I want to be that good, so I want to go to North Texas. And I think at the Centrum, the Port Townsend workshop, hearing a little bit about that. And I actually auditioned, I think my second year of college, and I did it through the mail. Back when you would do an audition through the mail, you'd literally put in a tape, put it in a folder or an envelope. And I never heard back. And I'm thinking it must have got lost because I didn't even get a, thanks, but no thanks. But the audition process was rigorous for drummers. And I wasn't quite at the level where I knew all my scales on mallets, because it wasn't just, oh, show us how great you are on drums. Show us how well-rounded of a musician you are.
I want to
So-
interrupt here just for a second, because this is
Absolutely.
important. I think what a lot of people need to understand is for a lot of these collegiate things, or if you want to study, if you play drums, they expect you to actually know music on the staff as well. So learning how to read notes and music is kind of important if you want to study music at a higher level. Would you agree with this?
Absolutely. Because drums are just one part of the whole. Rhythm is, it's like the iceberg, the picture of the iceberg, and you got the tip, and then you've got the whole big chunk. And what you hear the drummer doing is just the tip of the iceberg. What a good drummer understands and is doing on the inside is that whole chunk of the iceberg. And if we're only focusing on that sound, we don't know the relevance of the sound or why they're playing those awesome licks.
Excellent information. All right, so you
yeah.
did your audition.
I did
And
the audition, got no response, and so boo. And at that time I had met Charlie Gray, the director at Portland State. We were just doing shows together, some musicals. And he said, you should come to Portland State. They've got a great percussion teacher. So I went to Portland State for a year, and I met Joel Bluestone. Dr. Bluestone was the percussion teacher. And he just catapulted my playing. He filled in a lot of gaps in terms of I'd never studied mallets, so helped with my reading. And just rhythm reading and comprehension, I could read anything because he was into a lot of contemporary percussion ensemble music.
So you were, at this point, you were both classically trained and
Yes.
jazz as well?
Yeah, so, with Mount Hood, if you want to be a music major, you want to be drummer, you play in, the concert band. The lessons I was taking was really just jazz-based. At Portland State, because they didn't say have a jazz major, you couldn't major on drum set. I was doing percussion. I was playing in the jazz band, but a lot of focus on percussion, which was great because you learn how to play the instrument. You learn how to read music. And so that year, I re-auditioned for North Texas. I actually went down there and got offered a scholarship on the spot. Wow. Amazing experience auditioning with Ed Soph. Yeah. This is... one of the first compliments I got, a nonverbal compliment, is Ed. Ed's funny if you ever meet him. He likes to play a grump, but he's really a sweetheart. So, what do you want? So you walk into his office, and he's sitting at his desk in the back of the studio, and he's like, all right, sit down, sit at the drums, I'm going to play. He turns on an Ebersol. And I'm playing, and he just stops writing, and he turns, and he looks at me, and just kind of does one of those. All right. He said, okay, I'll offer you a scholarship. It was basically that. Well, there's more to the audition because he listens to how you play, and it's an Ebersol. So I know he's listening to not just, he's probably listening, what's your time feel, what's your feel? How are you interacting with how the rest of the rhythm section is playing? And I think he had me play a song. He said, name a jazz tune, and I think I said, Au Pravov, Charlie Parker tune. He said, now play it around the kit. It's like, okay, so you play the melody kind of thing. And so I was offered a scholarship on the spot, which was exhilarating. You also have to go through, you got to audition on marimba, you got to audition on timpani and snare drum and all that. So the following year, I went down to North Texas and started that experience.
Wonderful. So they're also well known, for those that don't know, as being a tremendous music school, and they've had a long tradition of being so. Who was on the faculty at that time? I know Yoda, Lynn Seaton, maybe. Was he around at the time or no?
Lynn joined up one of my last years. Bass player named John Adams. He's a Dallas area player, great player. You can hear him on some Woody Herman stuff from the 80s. Just great player. Dan Hurley was the piano teacher, and he also taught the jazz theory, and of course he headed all the jazz piano stuff. Neil Slater was the 1 o'clock director. Jim Riggs was the 2 o'clock director. These are the names of the jazz bands. When I was there, I'm trying to remember, I think there were 12, if I'm right. There were 12 jazz bands. Wow. Rehearsed at the time that they're called the 1 o'clock, rehearsed at 1, 2 at 2, 3, 4, 5. And then if you didn't make a jazz band, there was reading bands, which was great. So it's a huge school. When I was going there, a lot of people told me, it's so interesting, don't go there, because there's a lot of competition there. Oh, everyone's vying for spots. And you think, well, isn't that life? Everyone's vying for gigs. People are kind of vying for attention and their opportunity to play. What was so wonderful about that is it wasn't like competition; it was community. Yeah. I mean, would you rather be in a department where there's 2 drummers, or be in a department where there's 20 killer drummers who are all as excited to learn and play as you are, hanging out together, listening to music together, going out to clubs and listening to drummers together, gleaming information off of people? So, I mean, my buddies, Ari Hoenig was there. Yeah. I'm trying to think some of the other people who've gone off. Stockton Helbring, I think he was there. I was still in town, but he was there. He's playing in Dallas. He played with Doc Severinsen. Some great players, but there's the player who was just killer with fast time. There's a player who had the Latin stuff down, the funk guy. And, there was practice buildings, 3 stores, apartment buildings, full of practice rooms, people just practicing all the time. Yeah. So you could go and hang with people and go to room and say, hey, can you show me your ride cymbal technique? It wasn't this evil cutthroat, oh, I'm not going to be your friend because I want to take a spot away from you. Yeah. Everyone hung out. So because there were so many people there, there's that much more to learn from, and there's tons of opportunities to participate.
Well,
And, yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and if you're willing to take constructive feedback, if you're willing to look at what it is you need to prove upon, then you'll grow. Some people would show up, not make a band, get mad, and quit. I didn't make a band my first fall, and I had come from environments where I got offered a scholarship to be in this band. I was in the top band, and I didn't make a band. And so it's like, okay, I guess I have some holes in my playing. You know, what does Ed have to tell me? Okay, I'm going to work on what he tells me. I got into the 7 o'clock band. Next year, the 5, the 4, then I got into the 2 o'clock. I was able to sub in the 1 o'clock. So that's the other thing, is you're in an environment where you see, okay, that person's taking care of business. What is this person doing in the 1 o'clock band? There's my example of what I need to strive for. So, and they do. They tell you absolutely everything you need to do to get to that point if you're willing to work on it. So for me, it was a perfect school for me. It was great. Some people might be intimidated by that kind of rigor and expectations. I thrived on it. I'm the type of person where I need to tell me exactly what I need to do, versus, say, another school environment where the teachers are like, well, what do you want to work on? What do you have prepared for me this week?
Yeah, and I don't want to get into that because some schools are kind of doing that now. Well,
Yeah.
what would you like to do? And I'm not gonna get into it.
Yeah,
I'm gonna get in trouble.
That could be another podcast about academia in jazz.
Yeah. Well,
So,
okay. So
yeah.
so you're at University of North Texas. After you graduated from University of North Texas, and I'm assuming you did a lot of playing in the ensembles there, and maybe possibly some touring as well. Did you stick around Texas for a while, or what happened after that?
I did. So I officially, I tapered off my schooling. You know, I went full time, and then the last, I think, year and a half, I was going part time. So I finished in '98, and I stuck around the Dallas and Denton area for 2 more years, and did a lot of playing. Great area, just a lot of gigs, because there's a lot of, say, money, like we used to say oil money. In industry, there was a lot of corporate gigs. A lot of high rises where, there's corporate party on the 40th floor, there was things like debutante balls, which are really interesting. A lot of country clubs with a lot of money. So there's some valuable experiences, say, playing in I don't want to say old-timey, for lack of a better term, an old-timey swing band at a country club where the leader would not allow me to go on the ride cymbal hardly at all. Everything was closed, hi-hat, tick, tick, a tick, tick, a tick. And if you swung too hard, it's like, oh, that might make him nervous. But excellent players for that genre. Blown away by these sax sections and their clarinet skills. I remember the most amazing clarinet sections I've ever heard. But it was an opportunity for a young person to make money playing music, and a variety of music. So I'd play in these country club swing bands, playing rock bands and funk bands. There was the Dallas Jazz Orchestra, the DJO. Ed Soph called it the Dallas Chainsaw Orchestra, but anyways. But no, that was a fun band. That was kind of like the big band that all the cats would kind of, feed through. And they would just read on the gigs, and they would play at, I think, the Dallas Country Club, but that was like every Sunday night. Great experience. A lot of the players in that band were North Texas grads, people who have been on the road with people, and they're off the road. That was great fun. Let's see what else. Cover bands, learn a lot of pop music. There's country music, Western swing. So another great environment to be in, playing with a lot of players who know a lot of songs. And you're in situations where, say like with these swing bands, played a lot of old like Benny Goodman stuff. Or I'm just trying to think, other songs that you don't really see in your high school book, even if your high school plays like swing dances and stuff. So again, just very educational. Pete Peterson and the Collection was another popular big band there I got to play with. And then there was Richardson is a suburb of Dallas. I think near Plano, or was it? It was Richardson actually, is the suburb, and they had an orchestra. Anshel Brusiloff was the conductor there. He was a conductor of the Dallas Symphony at one point, and I think was concertmaster of the Cleveland Symphony. I could be wrong, but he was directing that group. So it was an education playing percussion, and it was really like pops orchestra stuff for that stellar of a conductor. And that's a whole nother ballgame in terms of where the beat is with the baton. So that kind of an education was wonderful too. And I still, on occasion, I'll play in symphonies up around here.
Well, aside from the private gigs and corporate gigs and symphonic work, what about clubs in Dallas? I mean, I know there are clubs. I mean, I've sat in a couple times at different Zambuca clubs down there, but I'm sure those are probably around at the time. But any clubs that you can recall that were kind of the popular ones?
My memory of the names. What I do remember is in Denton, where North Texas is. Fry Street was the name of one of the streets, and I can't remember what the cross street was. But there were clubs in town there where stuff was happening off campus. There's Rick's. Rick's Bar was where all the big bands played, and sometimes when groups would come through town, they'd play there. There's a place called Cool Beans where we'd play on the roof. And you wouldn't make any money, but they'd give you food. And, for a college kid, it's like, yes, thank you. But so many nights spent in the, blazing heat, sweating, on the roof at night there in Denton. That was really great. Boy, the Dallas clubs, again, my memory fades. Sambuca was a club there. And I don't know if it was a club there, but there's an area called Deep Ellum. And there were clubs down there. But honestly, boy, some of those names have faded.
I can't remember because I remember going down there on a tour. This is right after I graduated from college, so it had been like 2002, and we played. We went to sit in and we went to listen to music, and Lynn Seaton was playing in one. And the one that we sat in, I can't remember which town it was, but it was a small Zambuca. And he said, "Oh, well, I'm playing here in a couple nights in another town." And it was a massive, really large room, and I can't remember which town which was, but they had a presence.
Long time. Yeah, Lynn, so you asked about Lynn. So he came in on the bass chair, and I got to play with him. I think back, it's like I got to play with Lynn Seaton, just doing trio stuff, which was really wonderful. And I think at the time, he was just getting off the road with Jeff Hamilton. And he was settling in. I remember he was going through a phase where he was dealing with, choices. It's like, I've got a family. And he has an opportunity to teach at the university, but that means he can't be on the road as much, which it's really tough. It's tough when you have to make those choices.
We're going to talk about this because we talked about this before we started this interview. But I want to just interject, and again, we're not talking about a bunch of other people, but people that don't know Lynn Seaton is a wonderful bassist. And I remember being in college, we went down to there was like a festival, and we participated down there.
Down in the Dallas area?
Yeah.
It was probably in Plano. There was some kind of festival.
Honestly, I should know. I can't remember. But Lynn was teaching there, and he was doing a workshop on just constructing bass lines. And, I didn't need to go watch that, but I did because I had met him. I knew he was a great player. And what I will say is he was a tremendous teacher. The way that he was able to convey information to people to help them understand it quickly and easily, I was fascinated by that. So anyways, that's just an aside. So, all right, you're playing clubs in Texas. What brought you back to the Northwest? Or was there anything else prior? Was it just Dallas and then Northwest, or what happened?
So I had started my family down there. I have 2 sons, and I'm from the Northwest. And coming from a place of mountains and green and water, going down to Texas, which is dry and flat for miles and miles and miles, I was really homesick. And the thing is, professionally, the scene is great down there. Yes. I probably could have been very content staying them there. But there was something in me, I didn't want my boys to grow up in Texas.
Well, this is the segue
Not
from
that there's anything wrong with growing up in Texas.
Professional life and family and that balance. This kind of segues into all that. So
plus growing up here and being a part of the music scene, and say the time I spent at the Port Townsend workshop, and seeing the professionals who are from Seattle and just dreaming, well, one day I want to do that, and then I want to teach at this camp, or, I dreamt of being a professional musician up here. So it was always my long-term goal to come back here. My boys were young. They were starting to develop twangs and accents. I thought, I feel so separated from them if they're going to talk with these accents. Not that there's anything wrong with that. So just wanting to raise my boys up here and have a family up here. And this is just home. Yeah. So family and I moved up to the Olympia area for affordability, at the time. And it's just about smack dab between Portland and Seattle. Yes. And I still have an affinity for Portland. And had thoughts maybe relocate there.
Yeah, well, now it could be 5 hours either direction to Seattle or Portland from Olympia on traffic.
Absolutely, yeah. So I was just wanting to come back home, and being ingrained in the music scene up here. So 2000, we moved up here. Yeah.
Well, and you are very ingrained with lots of teaching, lots of performing, and involved with different bands. In the bio that I put on the beginning of the live stream, it talks about several of these different things, one of which is the Seattle Women's Jazz Orchestra. Can you talk a little bit about that and your involvement with that?
Sure. So SWOJO is the acronym, the Seattle Women's Jazz Orchestra. I first got called by them. I'm trying to get the years right, and I can't quite remember if they started in 2000 or 2001. But about that time, when I first moved up here, they called me because they said, "Oh, well, we're an all-women jazz orchestra, and we need a drummer." And so I started playing with them. I can't remember if it was full-time or just off and on, just playing drums with them. And throughout these 20 years, I've been in and out of the group in different capacities. When I started graduate school, I told them I just needed to take a break. But then every once in a while, I'd get called to sub as their director. Daniel Barry was their longtime director. And, if he's busy, I'd come up and I'd direct. And then I was a board member different years. And then Daniel stepped down. He just got to the point where it was time for him to move on. And then I stepped in as director. I was interim director for, I can't remember if it was a year or two. And then they officially posted the director position, and they decided to have co-directors. So Jill Townsend is a composer. She's also a trombonist, but she's more of a composer now out of BC, out of Vancouver, BC. And excellent big band charts. If you ever come across an opportunity to play her charts, they're really, really great. And SWOJO had a lot of her charts in the book, and they had brought her down as a guest artist and played concert of her stuff. So we were actually co-directing, Jill and I, and it worked out well because we were both commuting. She was commuting to Seattle from Vancouver, BC, bless her heart. But she just really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it. So we would split up the year. And it was nice because the two of us could kind of collaborate on things.
Well, you were composing and arranging for the group as well, is that correct? Or of the pieces?
Not for the big band, but I have been doing some composing and arranging at different times. I was asked, so the Washington Center in Olympia, they have a black box, a smaller theater, and they were doing a black box jazz series. Michael Olson, a musician down there, he comes up with kind of the theme for the season. Like 1 year he did all guitarists, or say trumpet players or whatnot. And so 1 year he wanted to do women composers. And so he invited me to do, it was funny because he invited me to do one of the shows, and I initially turned him down. I said, I don't really write, I play other people's stuff. And he said, well, I really want you to think about it. And I think what it was is I was a little shy. I didn't have the confidence. And he kept calling me. And I remember I was thinking, I should just do it. I can write. I took composition classes. I had to write and arrange all through college. And I had starts of songs. And he called me back. And I thought, okay, well, here's my second chance. So I said yes. So I actually composed, we did an hour set of original arrangements. And then I started kind of fleshing those out for other ensembles. And so I'll play my charts around town. I didn't bring any for today's show because they're more for larger ensembles there. Haven't got into big band arranging, but I've been talking to some big band arrangers about taking some of these starts and arranging them. I also I also see a niche for junior high. I would love to see the beginning jazz band to have more standardized charts that are simple, but draw more from professional players and arrangements. And there are some arrangers who do that. I have heard charts where, say, there's a classic solo that's written, say, as a soli. And I would like to see more of that so that the young players, their first experiences with the jazz charts are some standard arrangements and learning a little bit of repertoire, from the solos.
I have more questions, but
Sure.
it's getting close to that time, so I want to open things
Absolutely.
up. If we have any questions from the audience for Maria, please let us know. And sometimes, we usually have someone here manning the computer. I don't today, but sometimes my phone doesn't get me the questions. So if you have any questions for Maria or myself at this time, please feel free to put them in the comments, and we will get to them if we can. And if we can't in real time, we can do them after the fact, too. So,
Sure.
yeah.
I want to say a little bit more about SWOJO, about
Please, please.
the Seattle Women's Jazz Orchestra. What I've appreciated so much and why I keep being involved with them, if it were just any other jazz band, I probably would have said, okay, I play with a million big bands, thanks, this was fun. But for one thing, they're professionally run. They're a nonprofit. They have a board. They have a clear vision. They're just very well managed business-wise. Performing with them, I've got to play at Jazz Alley, at Tula's, part of the Earshot Jazz Festival. I mean, they're ingrained in the scene. But their mission is really to shed more attention to women performers and women composers. They don't play exclusively women's music, but their goal, I think at the time, it was 60 to 70% of the book, or what we do on a gig would be from women composers or arrangers. And for 5 or 6 seasons, we were a part of the Earshot Jazz Festival, and our performance in that was we would bring in a guest artist. And they started a composition program. So it was an international call for women composers to compose an original chart to feature whoever that guest artist was. And so the first year it was Ingrid Jensen. And Jessie Smith, who was down, I think, at University of Oregon at the time, wrote a chart for Ingrid Jensen. Just a killer chart. She won, so there was a small money prize, but then we also fly the composer in to work with the guest artist. And then that's performed at the Earshot Jazz Festival. So that's wonderful. Every year, the entries get more and more mature. A lot of entries from Berklee students. I think you could tell the word started getting out, but just wonderful, wonderful compositions. And then there's an understanding that we get rights to the song. Not exclusive, but, we could have it in our book. And then that's one of the ways we were filling out our book with more women composers. Plus, when you talk about the composer, they have a website. A lot of them are professional composers now. One year we brought someone in from Germany. We brought someone in from, I think, Seoul, Korea, and I can't remember if it was Taiwan or Thailand. So it's an amazing opportunity for outreach, and I really believe in that.
If people want to learn more about this and how they can check out the music and the performances, where can they do that?
So swojo.org, SWOJO.org, is their website. Of course, because of COVID, things are on hold, but I do believe, so I actually have not been working with them. I think it was the December before COVID hit. Again, I was just busy. So it's just another of those. I kind of do this with the group because I just get so busy. So I stepped down from being their director, but I think they have continued the composition contest because that's something that doesn't have to be in person. And so I think this last year they did have it. They did choose a winner, and they highlighted that person. But the website is still up, and I know that they will keep things updated in terms of when they're going to start playing live again. They rehearse at a high school in Bellevue, and because the schools were shut down, I know they didn't have a place. And who knows what's going to be happening with live performances and rehearsing for the next little bit.
Definitely. Well,
Yes.
we've got about 5 minutes left here. Let me see if I've missed any questions, and if I do miss your question, I sincerely apologize. A couple things. One, if people want to find out more about where they can hear you play or study with you or find out what's going on with music-related stuff, where can they do that?
Well, right now, unfortunately, my web presence is basically nil. But that's my project for this year, is getting my website back up. I am on Facebook. If you just looked for me, it's under Maria Wulf. You can just send me an IM. But like I said, I had a website up years ago. It just kind of fizzled, and I'm getting that back up. So yeah.
Are you comfortable with people having your email if they want to just contact you directly for lessons or
Sure.
gigs or things? And
Sure. mjjoyner@hotmail.com. So that's MJJOYNER@hotmail.
I'm glad there's a fellow hotmailer
Yes.
out there.
Well, yeah, but no, my goal for this year is to get YouTube channel up, because I have a lot of my education I've been wanting to put online for my students and just to put out there. So be watching for that, and then and website will be back up. But I'm on Facebook, and I advertise what's going on. So if you want to keep up with what I'm doing, send me a friend request, and then you'll see those posts.
And something that I like to ask all my guests is, here you are in, we're 2021 now. If you were talking to someone who was thinking about becoming a musician or going deeper down that rabbit hole of being a musician as a life choice, what's something that you've learned that you found to be very helpful and important for yourself that you would maybe impart to them?
Boy, I could talk for a long time on that. And so if you want to make it a profession, then treat it like a job. You know, take every element of it seriously. If you want to be a lawyer, you think, well, what's the best lawyer school? Law school I can go to. You know, what are the best law firms to work for? If you want to be a professional musician, college sometimes isn't the only route. You can study on your own with the best players, but be professional. Treat it like a job. Dress appropriately. Do your research. Find the people who are doing what you want to do. Figure out what they did to get there. But here's a big thing for success is you have to know how to network. The more you network, the more connections you're going to get, the more plugged in you're going to get. And I've been talking with the parent of one of my college students, saying, well, you know, he's out of college now. Do you have any advice for, you know, how we can get involved? I said, network. Go to a club to watch a band play, you know. Hang out with your friends when they're playing. Things will happen organically. Create your own gig and then call different people for different gigs. The more you get out there, and then it'll start to happen organically. That's what happened with me. You know, first come to town, go to a jam session. Suddenly everyone knows, hey, a new drummer's in town. Be willing, you know, this is a little touchy subject about being willing to play for free. That's dangerous, but I'll call them investment gigs. When I'd play with like the Emerald City Jazz Orchestra at Tula's, wouldn't really get paid, sometimes get gas money, but almost every time I would get called, someone would say, hey, I heard so-and-so said you're a great reader with big band, I need to hire, you know, can I hire you? A lot of times there's directors in those bands say, can you come do a clinic for my rhythm section? So that's why I call those investment gigs, but you also have to respect your own professionalism. You don't want to give away your art. You don't want to let club owners know that they can just bring you on without paying you. So that's a trick. That's a touchy conversation. I don't want to say that too much, but there are ways that you can volunteer in order to network. So.
All very good points. Maria,
Yes.
thank you so much for joining us. This has been a pleasure. And as I mentioned with all these people, like usually I'll show up to a gig and play and then not really have a lot of time to chat. So I love getting to know all these artists better and to finally hear more of your backstory. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to all of our listeners. If you've been enjoying the content that we're doing here, please feel free to support us either via Venmo or PayPal or mailing a check, and all that information is on the beginning of this post. As per usual, all these things will also be up on YouTube, so you can go back and watch them anytime. And I'm sorry that we only have an hour because there's a million more questions that I want to ask you, so we'll have to do another one.
Absolutely.
But thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for watching. We're going to take a short break here, do a quick sound check, and then we'll be right back with some live music for you. So thank you so much, and stick around.
All right, thanks.